person's skull is different from this person's skull. That means these people must be better than these people. Correct? When you read about these, you'll see that over time, this nonsense evolves in such a way. But now we reach a stage where, subhanAllah, there are people who try to justify racism either using their culture or using religion. When it comes to culture, there's a very interesting dynamic between Islam and culture. For example, if you study the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa sallam, if you study his biography and the biography of the Imams, you will find that the Imams tied in their Arab heritage. Correct? Islam did not come and say, no more Arab culture. On the contrary, whatever contradicted Islam, such as idol worship, such as the burial of their daughters, correct? Such as the way they would treat certain people in their society, this form of Arab culture is now gone. It is now haram. Correct? But for example, poetry is something that the Arabs love. Does Islam say this must come to an end? Say no. Bravery, generosity, correct? Many different parts of Arab culture. Likewise, when we see Islam, when the religion spreads and it starts to encompass other cultures, such as the Persians, such as the people of the subcontinent, such as in North Africa, correct? Islam did not come say, I'm going to destroy your culture completely. But whenever there is something in culture that contradicts Islam, we as Muslims firmly believe that we have no interest and no need for this culture, period. Correct? So for example, if we see that the culture of a people who has accepted Islam teaches that, for example, if someone is of a lighter skin tone, that they are better than someone else, what do we say? We say, you take your culture, go someplace else. We're not interested in this. This is not what the Quran taught us. The Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the verse that I recited for you, He says, Inna akramakum indallahi what? Correct? It's not whether you're male or female. It depends on your piety, your God-awareness. It's not the color of your skin. It is your piety, your God-awareness. Correct? It's not what country you come from. It is your piety, your God-awareness. And alhamdulillah, this is something I always note for people. I say, when you look at the history of our madhab, the madhab of the Ahlul Bayt, you see that our great Salaf al-Salih, rahimahullah, among them were Arabs, among them were Persians, correct? Among them, come from various different backgrounds. But then over time, after Imam Sahib al-Asr al-Zaman, Abdullah Fuad al-Sharif, he goes into Layla, and then we see the Hawza of the Shia madhab begin to become more and more powerful. We see many of the early fuqaha are what? They're Arab. But then you start seeing examples. You see, for example, many of our great early scholars are Persian, such as Thiqat al-Islam Kulayni, rahimahullah, such as the Shaykh al-Tusi, rahmatullah, Shaykh al-Saduq. Then now we are starting to see, for example, scholars from Afghanistan, like Shaykh Ishaq al-Fayyad, hafidhahullah, Shaykh Bashir Najafi, hafidhahullah. They are from Afghanistan, from India. They are becoming some of our highest ranking mujtahids. One day, and you mark my words, maybe I will be an old man by that time, maybe I will be dead. You will have scholars from areas that you think Islam has not even touched. One day you may see a marjah from South America, a marjah from Brazil, a marjah from Argentina, correct? It is just as crazy to you and me now as perhaps it was to those people back then. They say, well, our great marjah, our great mujtahideen are from India now, from Afghanistan, correct? But in any case, let's take a quick overview. In tonight's lecture, we'll be taking a quick overview as to how Islam dealt with the issue of racism and why we would say it continues to be predominant in the Muslim world today, inshallah. So the first thing that I want to go over is when we look at Islam, Islam begins, its history is in the Arabian Peninsula, which you agree. When it comes to Islamic history, we see that many of the early Sahaba, many of them were not Arabs. For example, and I do dislike to bring this up, and I'll tell you why in a second. Bilal is from where? He's of African origin. Bilal, me and some of the brothers, may Allah bless them, have noted this. Bilal's biography is so rich. Bilal is without a doubt one of the greatest Sahaba of Rasulullah, and it has nothing to do with the color of his skin. Many people today, what have we reduced Bilal to? A race card. But Bilal, when you look at his jihad fi sabilillah, when you look at his sabr through torture, when you look at his wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, this subhanAllah, many of our Muslim brothers and sisters who claim to love Bilal, you ask them, whatever happened to Bilal during the reign of Abu Bakr? Where did he go? Correct? Many people don't know, for example, Bilal died as a shaheed. Correct? We've reduced this man to what? A race car. Salman al-Muhammadi, salamullah, who is, in my opinion, and according to many of our scholars, the greatest companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam outside of his family. Where was he from? He was Persian, correct? Suhaib al-Rumi, he was Greek, correct? You see, many of the Sahaba came from many different backgrounds, because Mecca at that point was something of a melting pot itself. But when we look historically, how did the Arabs look at other races? This is something really interesting. The Arabs hated the other races because the other races looked down on the Arabs. The Rome, the Greeks. If you look at old Roman maps of the Middle East, what will you see that they label Arabia? Arabia Maxima and Arabia Felix is Yemen. But you know they had another name for Arabia? It's called the Cradle of Heresy. I don't remember the exact Greek word. The reason why it's called the Cradle of Heresy is because the Greeks were like, we believe in one God, we believe in Christianity, we have philosophers, mathematicians. Those Arabs down there are insane. Those people are crazy. So the Greeks look down upon the Arabs. The Persians, what do the Persians think of the Arabs? The Persians hated the Arabs. If you look back at the Seerah, there's a very infamous scene where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sends his messenger to Kisra. I heard a salawat. Raise your voice to do salawat. My dear brothers and sisters, it is our majlis. How often we want to decorate it is up to us. If you want to decorate it with more salawat, do so. Sallu ala Muhammad. When Rasulullah sent his messenger to the king of Persia, it is one of the funniest but one of the saddest stories in the early Islamic history. When Rasulullah's messenger comes to Kisra, who was the ruler of Persia at the time, he reads the letter from Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to Kisra, the ruler of the Persians. Kisra says, hold on a minute. This man puts his name before mine? You, a filthy Arab from the desert, come to my palace, come to my capital, and you put this man's name before me? Correct? How dare you? And he took Rasulullah's letter. What did he do with it? He ripped it to shreds. When Rasulullah read the news, he said, he ripped my letter. May Allah rip his kingdom apart. And subhanAllah, when we look a few years later, what did the Muslims do to the Persian Empire? They completely wiped it off the map. The Greeks, the Rome, some of it remained for a very long time. Correct? But the Persian Empire was completely wiped out. The Persians hated the Arabs and said, these people are uncivilized. We have our palaces, we have had kings and shahs since time immemorial, we have poetry, we have our religion, correct? They have both Zoroastrianism and Christianity. These Arabs, what do they have? What do they contribute to society? They're nothing more than bandits and raiders. So when many of the Arabs later on, when they became the rulers, when they became the kings, when they overran these powerful empires, time and again defeating them on the battlefield, and entering and plundering their palaces, what ends up happening? Reactionary. Reactionary, this is something I want to discuss. When it comes to the madhab of the Ahlul Bayt, our madhab is not reactionary. My brothers and sisters, this is something I see, it's a very terrible trend. We see that, for example, in our madhab, when we hear that the other sects in Islam love a certain figure, what do we say? Oh, we have to raise the status of Fulan, because Fulan killed Fulan. Reactionary. Oh, they're celebrating this, let's do this instead. Likewise, you see that sometimes the Mukhalifeen have become very reactionary. I'll give you an example. Have you ever noticed, since early 2000s to now, how many posters, social media, all over the place you see people saying, guys, remember to fast on the 10th of Muharram. And they'll narrate ahadith, they'll narrate for you these narrations. Bukhari said, Fulan said, Fulan said. You ever notice that started becoming a big deal after Ziyarat al-Arba'in, after Muharram started becoming a bigger deal? When the non-Muslims started asking what it is? This is reactionary, right? Reactionary, that is not the way a Muslim should be. A Muslim should be as Allah and His Messenger commanded him to be, not the way your opponent wants you to be. Don't let your opponent, your adversary, dictate who you're going to be, correct? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of his great merits, and he would say this, is a very famous hadith from Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. He says, I have been given certain things, 4 or 5 characteristics that no other prophet has been given. One of them, for example, is that the earth was made a masjid for me. I don't know what the Muslims want. We don't have to go to a certain building to pray. We can pray anywhere, we have the earth. That's why we carry the turban with us, correct? But one of the merits of Rasulullah, he says, I was sent as a messenger to all of mankind and all of jinnkind as well. It doesn't matter what race you come from, what ethnicity you come from. I was sent to them all, correct? When we look at the way the Arabs viewed these non-Arabs, you see a very interesting phenomenon. You see under, for example, Omar, the second ruler, Omar had a severe distaste for the non-Arabs. Legendary almost. And if you don't believe me, you can go back to the books such as Musannaf Abdul Razzaq, which is one of the oldest hadith books that we still have today. Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba, who's the teacher of Bukhari. Pull up examples as to the way Omar viewed the Ajam, the non-Arabs. Correct? He hated them, their language, their culture, the very people he had an issue with them. But for example, we see something very interesting with Amir al-Mu'mineen Salam. You see Amir al-Mu'mineen, some of his greatest disciples were non-Arabs. Tamar, for example, many people don't know that he was a Persian. He was a Persian man living in Kufa. Salman al-Farisi was a Persian man, correct? Abu Dharr's servant, who we will discuss at the end, John ibn Huyay, was a man of African origin. You see that over time, as the Muslim empire got bigger and bigger and bigger, slowly the non-Arabs began to play a larger role in the society. However, there was a big block in the middle, and that's Bani Umayyad. Bani Umayyad, when you read over their history, they ruled over the Islamic world for about a century, but the damage that they did, we are still recovering from it today. Correct? And when it comes to Bani Umayyad, even our opponents, the non-Shia, they'll look at the history of Bani Umayyad and they'll admit to you, these people were horrible. Let me give you an interesting example as to this dichotomy. Who was the first king in Islamic history? Islam, we know who our prophet was. It was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? When it comes to the early rulers, who some about in Islam call them khulafa, we do not accept them as our khulafa. When you ask them, so was this person a ruler? He says, no. These rulers, they did not sit on thrones. They did not have guards over them while they prayed. They did not wear a crown. These were not kings. These were khulafa rashidin. Right? Amir al-Mu'mineen sallallahu alayhi, when you read his biography, you can't even call him a king. Only in metaphors and poetry you can call him a king. But the best title for him is what? Amir al-Mu'mineen. There's no title better than that. Right? But who is the first king in Islamic history? Well, I heard one of the brothers say Muawiyah, correct? Ibn Kathir, big Sunni scholar. Has anyone here heard of him? Ibn Kathir? Sahib al-Tafsir, and he has a history book. In his history book, I'll never forget, when he begins the reign of Muawiyah, you know what he says? He says, Muawiyah, we cannot call him Khalifa. Because there is a hadith narrated by Safina. Safina was the servant of Salama. And inshallah, on the later nights, I'll tell you more about Safina. Safina narrates, he says, Rasulullah said, the khilafah of the nubuwwah, the succession of the Prophet, will last 30 years. We agree with this hadith, no problem. Because Amir al-Mu'mineen lived for how long after Rasulullah? 30 years. After that, it will become mulk, it will become a kingdom. And Allah gives mulk to whoever He wills. So Ibn Kathir, what does he say? He says, we cannot call Muawiyah Khalifa. What must we call him? King, correct? But do you know what I say in response to Ibn Kathir? I say, you are not right. You have lied. The first king in Islam was not Muawiyah. It was Najashi in Africa. Najashi was a king, wasn't he? He accepted Islam, didn't he? Long before Muawiyah came to power. And people, they forget about this. The first king in Islamic history. What a righteous king he was. And Najashi, rahmatullah alayhi, we have a hadith from Sayyidina Abu Tufayl, he narrates that the Prophet, when he got the news of Najashi's death, he ordered the Muslims to pray janazah over him. This man was what? African. How many people here knew the first king in Islam was African? This is what happens when we don't read our books, brothers and sisters. When we don't think critically and read the heritage that our Salaf left behind for us. In any case, when we look at the early Sahaba, for example, I want to highlight a few episodes from their lives, from the lives of the non-Arab Sahaba, to show you just how this idea that one race is better than the other has no place in Islam. And I'll begin with Bilal. Bilal, was the mu'adhin of Rasulullah. This is something commonly known about him. But there's something that has become very popular, it's often narrated about him. They say that Bilal, had a speech impediment or a speech issue. Whenever he would do adhan, what would he say? Instead of saying, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, what would he say? Ashhadu, correct? Some of the brothers have heard this one before, some of the sisters may have heard this story before. Who's heard this before? Few of you have, okay. This is not true. This story has no basis. As far as I've researched, has no basis in our books in the Madhab of the Ahlul Bayt. And even in the books of the other sects in Islam, they say this has no basis as well. Bilal, even though he was of African origin, where was he born? He was born in Arabia. So how would he have a speech impediment when it comes to Arabic? Rasulullah's mu'adhin, was one of the most well-spoken people in the Arabic language. Wouldn't you agree? There's one example of one of those things that we often have to remind people, not everything that is popularly narrated is true. And as I mentioned yesterday, if you want the truth, you want to see what has a basis, you have to read our books. We have to read the primary sources. In any case, when it comes to Bilal, there's a very interesting episode from the prophetic seerah. There's a hadith that is narrated on the authority of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that Bilal is like a honeybee. A honeybee eats what is sweet and eats what is bitter. But what comes out of it? Only sweetness. And there's a hadith narrated by Shaykh al-Mufid in his Amali that Amir al-Mu'mineen in one of his khutbahs, he says, be like the honeybee. The honeybee takes in bitterness and it takes in sweetness. But what does it give back to the people around it? Sweetness. A mu'min should be like the what? Should be like the honeybee. A mu'min should be like Bilal. Correct? Bilal, there's this famous incident in Islamic history during the fall of Mecca when all the statues in the city have been toppled and Islam has finally purified the city of Mecca. And inshallah ta'ala, one day we will see majalis of Abu Abdullah and Hussein in the Holy Kaaba. Inshallah, bihamd Muhammad wa alihi. Correct? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alihi Muhammad. When this incident happened, Rasulullah told Bilal to get up and do adhan on the Kaaba. Some of these individuals who converted during the fall of Mecca, right? One of them, he turned to his brother, he said to him, he says, Alhamdulillah, our father died at Badr, so that he would not have to see this black man standing on top of the Kaaba giving adhan. Correct? This is how some people, the way they used to think back then. And we say, Alhamdulillah, this happened. That Bilal, of all people, Rasulullah chose him. One of the people in that audience who saw Bilal give the adhan that day was Sayyidina Jun bin Hulayy. Correct? The shaheed, one of the shuhada of Karbala. He is the servant of Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, correct? The other famous individual we must bring up, we've already mentioned, is Salman. Salman, who knows where he's buried? Salman Muhammad is buried in the city of Madain in Iraq. In English, for some reason, they call it Ctesiphon. I don't know how we got Ctesiphon and Madain. In any case, this was the old capital of the Persian Empire. If you have the fortune of going to Iraq and have the time to visit Madain, you will see the grave of Salman, and Hudayfa ibn Yaman. But in the same city, there is a very famous monument. It's called Bab Kisra. If anyone wants, you can look it up. It's what's left of Kisra's palace. SubhanAllah. Kisra, who ripped up Rasulullah's letter, his palace is in nothing but ruins. But Salman and Faris and people come from all over the world to visit this man because of his love of Adhan. Right? One of our poets, Abu Firas al-Hamdani, in one of his poems, he attacks Bani al-Abbas. He says, you people claim to be the relatives of Rasulullah. And then he says this line, كانت مودة سلمان لهم قربا أو لهم كانت مودة سلمان لهم رحمة ولم يكون بين نوح وابنه رحمة. Salman's love for them practically made him a member of the family. But Nuh, when Allah, that famous dialogue between Nabi Nuh and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after his son dies, he says, Nuh, he's not your son. You are bari from him. Correct? When it came to Salman, he was the first of the Persian people to accept Islam. And to this day, one of the great backbones of the Shia madhab is where? It's the Hawza of Qom. Correct? But when it comes to, for example, the other companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we often forget that Rasulullah had non-Arab wives. This is something that I find really interesting. If you look at other madhahib in Islam, you will see that some of the fuqaha have a rule. It's called the rule of kafa or the rule of kufr. What does this mean? It means that if you come from a certain tribe, if you're a man, you can marry lower. You can marry someone from a tribe that is not as significant as yours. For example, if you're from Quraysh, you can marry someone from Yemen, correct? But if, for example, that man from Yemen wants to marry a woman from Quraysh, can he marry her? He said no. If there is a Muslim from Africa, he wants to marry a woman from Quraysh, can he marry her? No. Correct? And this is something I've seen very interestingly. This law, for example, a lot of the Muslim scholars are now just ignoring it, acting like it never existed. In our madhab, the madhab of the Ahlul Bayt, Imam al-Sadiq salamullah alayhi gave us. This is something I wish to stop and point out. Imam al-Sadiq salamullah alayhi has this uncanny ability to solve issues that are such a big deal for the other madhab in Islam. He solves them in one hadith, one very short hadith. Imam al-Sadiq salamullah alayhi, they asked him about this issue. What did he say? He said, al-mu'min kufr al-mu'mina. Kufr, do we understand what it means, by the way? In Surah Al-Fatiha, right? وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, right? Not Surah Al-Fatiha, Surah Al-Ikhlas. So, kufr, what does it mean? It means an equal, someone who's worthy of you. Allah has no one who equals him, correct? When we look at the law of kufr, according to Imam Sadiq, he says, al-mu'min kufr al-mu'mina. What does that mean? The mu'min, the believing man, is a match for the believing woman. If a believing woman is from Iraq, she can marry a believing man from India. If a believing woman is from Africa, she can marry a believing man from Afghanistan. As long as they are mu'min. Is a non-mu'min man a match for a mu'min woman? Say no. A mu'min woman has izzah. Allah has given her that, correct? When it comes to our Imams, alayhi salam, there's a very interesting point that I see some of the opponents of the Ahlul Bayt bring up. Tell me if you've heard this one before. Shiism is a Persian invention. Have you heard this one before? Shiism is something the Iranians invented because they were sad that their empire went away. I said, well, I don't understand. 1 minute you say we come from a Jew. 1 minute you say we come from Zoroastrians. 1 minute you say we come from Iranians. At least make up your mind. If you're going to lie, stick to one lie. Correct? They say the Shiism, where did it come from? It came from these Iranians who were upset that the Arabs destroyed their empire, so they made up a new religion. Correct? How do we refute this? I'll give you a few easy ways to refute this. Part of the reason why they say, and the evidence they bring, subhanAllah, they say because the reason why the Persians chose Shiism and they put so much emphasis on Ahlul Bayt is because Imam al-Hussein married a Persian woman. Is this true? Yes, it's true. Sayyidah Shahraban, the mother of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. She was a Persian princess. Correct? This is why some of the poets, when they praise Imam al-Sajjad, they say he comes from the two best houses. He comes from the best lineage of the Arabs. He is a descendant of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he is a descendant of the greatest house of the non-Arabs, from the Persian royal family. So they say, it is for this reason that the Iranians chose Shiism. They pretend to love the Ahlul Bayt. But there's just one problem. You know what that problem is? Let's go to Iran. Stop any Iranian on the street. If you ask them about Imam Sajjad, how much information are they going to be able to give you? Good information. I'm not doing two of one of our Muslim brothers. They'll give you some facts probably. But then if you stop a random one of our Iranian brothers and ask him about Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, how much information is he going to give you? Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, every single year, Majaz over Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. It's not one. Every man and woman in Iran grew up hearing the story of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. And they love Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. Every single Muslim, be he someone who prays 5 times a day, or someone who's lax with his salah, someone who goes to the mosque every week, or someone who, for example, only comes during Muharram, all of them love Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. That is something magnificent about Abu al-Fadl. Abu al-Fadl, when we look at his genealogy, when we look at his heritage, what was he? Abu al-Fadl was 100% Arab. His father is Ali ibn Abi Talib, ibn Abdul Muttalib, correct? And we trace his lineage back to Ismail, and his mother is who? His mother is al-Banin bint Hizam al-Kilabiyya, another Bedouin Arab woman. You say, wait a minute, why do these Iranians love this Arab man so much? This man is 100% Arab, correct? When it comes to Imam Sajjad, Imam Sajjad is half Persian. But when it comes to which one they know more about, which one they revere more, which one plays a bigger part and bigger influence in the way they act every day, correct? In Shiism, we have many figures of mixed race, mixed heritage that, for example, we don't even know about. I'll give you another example. Zayd al-Shaheed. Are there any people here who are Sada from the descendants of Zayd? A few. Zayd al-Shaheed, salamullah alayhi, is the son of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. Who was his mother? There are narrations that say his mother was a lady by the name of Jida or Jada or Hawra. She was a slave woman who was given to Imam Sajjad by Mukhtar al-Thaqafi. Was she Arab? We say no, she wasn't Arab. Some narrations indicate that she was from Sindh, which is modern-day Pakistan. Correct? Zayd al-Shaheed is a great figure in our history. And I often say to myself, I say, if the Shia knew more about the Ghulamiyya of Zayd al-Shaheed, of what he went through, of what he sacrificed, perhaps they would even devote majalis to him here. Correct? But we have oppressed ourselves by not reading our books, by not reading about these great heroes in ours. Zayd al-Shaheed was often called Halif al-Quran, the ally of the Quran. Was he fully Arab? You say no. Correct? Ismail salamullah alayhi, and this is something that is said that Zayd himself used to bring up when he was debating Bani Umayyah. He says, Ismail and Ishaq, which one of them is greater? Ismail. Ishaq's mother is Sarah, the cousin of Ibrahim. But Ismail's mother is who? Hajar, who is an Egyptian name. Correct? There's no difference between Arab, non-Arab, light-skinned, dark-skinned. This has no basis in the history of Islam. Some people will even find, I always love when this happens, some people are shocked when they find out some of our imams were figures of darker skin. Imam al-Calvin, have you read his physical description? He was said to be a man of color. Amir al-Mu'mineen, I found this very shocking. I found some narrations which indicate that he too was a man of color. Whether these narrations are authentic, it's disputable, but they exist. Correct? Many of Amir al-Mu'mineen's great companions, like Ammar ibn Yasir, also a man of color. There is no issue with this. Correct? But in any case, when we look at the racism of Bani Umayyah, I'll give you some examples. Just to show you what the Ahlul Bayt were up against. Imam al-Hussein, this is something that needs to be brought up, and we'll come back to it night after night. Imam al-Hussein, when he came out against Yazid, he took his few friends, his women and children, his brothers, his cousins. What was he after? Imam al-Hussein, there are some people who said he was after power, and he failed miserably. Imam al-Hussein is not after power. And there are many reasons why. We can prove this, we'll come to them later, inshallah. Imam al-Hussein, what did he want? What was he after? Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, says, al-Hussein, by going out against Yazid, he created a lot of shar, he created a lot of evil within the ummah. This is how some people think. Imam al-Hussein was giving a very simple message to us. This regime, if it continues to dominate the Islamic world, what will it do to Islam? It will transform it into something unrecognizable. And I'll give you a few examples. Muawiyah, there's a letter recorded. He wrote to one of his ministers, he wrote to one of his governors. He said, the population of the Persians within the empire is too high. I feel that one day they will rise up. So half of them need to be put to death. We need to overwork them by building our roads. And then the other half, we bring the population down 50%, it will be good. Is this Islam? Absolutely not. Alus ibn Qaysam, who's a famous Sunni narrator. If you want, go back to Tafsir al-Qurtubi, which is a very famous tafsir that belongs to the other, or the madhab of our other brothers in Islam. In Tafsir al-Qurtubi, there's a verse of the Quran that he does tafsir of. The verse says, and do not, malform, right, the creation of Allah. Shaitan will speak to some people and tell them, change the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alus ibn Qaysam, it is said that the way he interpreted this verse, if a man of mixed race or mixed marriage died, he would not attend his funeral. So because that person was changing the creation of Allah. Is this the way Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam taught Islam to us? Let me hear it for you, a beautiful hadith. a group of and this I believe is recorded in the book Wasail al-Shia by Hurr al-Amri, who's a scholar from Lebanon. He narrates, he says that Amir al-Mu'minin Salamullah alayhi, a group of the Ajam, the non-Arabs, came to him when he was in Kufa. He said, Ya Amir al-Mu'minin, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to give us ata equally, correct? He married Bilal, non-Arab, he married him to the sister of Abdurrahman ibn Auf, correct? Salman al-Farsi, he found him a wife. He used to marry his non-Arab companions. But these Arabs, they marry our women and they don't allow us to marry into their families. They discriminate against us and they disrespect us even though we have accepted Islam. Amir al-Mu'minin said, let me deal with this. Amir al-Mu'minin gathered the shuyukh, the heads of the famous Arab tribes, and he sat and discussed with them. There's a famous saying of this. He says, I know how to make you walk straight, meaning, but I won't sink myself to that level. I won't commit haram just to make you act right. And when he sits with these people, he discusses with them. He says, you know this isn't correct. You know these are not the teachings of Islam. Why are you doing this? These are your Muslim brothers and sisters. They said to him, Ya Abul Hasan, forgive us. We won't do this. Correct? Amir al-Mu'mineen left that gathering and he was visibly upset. He came back to these Muslims, these non-Arab Muslims. He said to them, my brothers in Islam, these people have treated you like the non-Muslims. They will marry your women, but they won't let you marry their women. Correct? So I will give you a piece of advice. Become merchants. Because I heard Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam say, 9/10 of rizq is in trade. The other 10 is in everything else. Correct? This is the message that Amir al-Mu'minin and the Ahlul Bayt taught. And that's why over time we see many of the companions of our Imams came from all different backgrounds. But perhaps one of the most striking examples is the story of Jun bin Huyay. Jun, as I mentioned, was only a young boy. He was the freedman of Abu Dhar. He was a young boy when he saw Bilal on top of the Kaaba. And you imagine how powerful that must have been for him. To see the way Rasulullah brought this system of Jahiliyyah to an end. He brought it crashing down. And what symbol did he put on top of the Kaaba to symbolize the coming of a new age? The adhan of La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Being uttered by a black man. Correct? Jun bin Huyay was also a black man. He was the freedman of Abu Dhar. Abu Dhar, many of you would have heard his story, his musibah, which in and of itself needs a lecture of its own. Abu Dhar, when he passed away, when he was martyred, Jun, what did he do? He has his freedom. When you have your freedom, you can go anywhere you want. Who does he go to? He goes back to the Ahlul Bayt. He stays with Amir al-Mu'mineen, Salamullah. Amir al-Mu'mineen is martyred, where does he go? He goes to Abu Muhammad al-Mustafa, Salamullah. Abu Muhammad al-Mustafa is poisoned, where does he go? We have to stop here for a second. This shows you how insignificant the dunya is in the eyes of Allah. That Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam dies of poison, that Amir al-Mu'mineen sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is struck in salat, that Al-Hasan is poisoned, that Al-Hussein sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is killed in Karbala. Correct? One by one, Ashab al-Kisab, the lights were put out. In any case, Jun bin Huyay transferred one member of the other until at last he was with Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Hussein has this striking characteristic when it comes to choosing his ansar. You know what it is? I don't want you unless you want to be here. Many times during his trip from Hijaz to Iraq, he tells them, if you want to go, you can go. Muslim bin Aqil has been killed. Looks like there's no uprising in Kufa. Whoever wants to go can go. Many of them left. Guys, looks like Yazid's army is here. They outnumber us, by a lot. If anyone wants to go, you can go. Imam Sajjad himself, and we'll go into detail on this in the coming months, inshallah. He himself narrates that story of the campfire. When Imam al-Hussein told them, he says, now I will put out the fire. I'll put out the light. So none of you feel any shame. Any one of you can leave now. Just take one member of my family with you. Correct? Take one member of my family with you. Take them someplace safe. All of them, one by one, after Bani Hashim, Abu al-Fadl, Abbas, Ali al-Akbar, stood up and said, we will never abandon you. An Arab does not abandon his sheikh. How will we abandon our imam? One by one, the Ansar of al-Hussein spoke up. June bin Huyay, you know what he said? Imam Hussein said to him, he said, June, you're an old man. We have narrations that say June was so old. Some of the companions of Imam Hussein were so old that the flesh of their eyes had sunk down like this. They couldn't see. The only way they could see was by what? By tying a headband. Correct? June bin Huyay, that's how old he was. Imam Hussein says to him, he says, June, you are an old man. Correct? He's giving him an excuse. He's giving him a way out. You are an old man. These people aren't here for you. These people are here for me. What use have you with spears and swords and pikes and metal? Correct? What use have you for the heat of Iraq? What use have you for this thirst, for death itself? You're free to go. Correct? God says, it tells him you're free to go. What does June say to him? He says, Ya Allah, you are yet a victim of my prophet. I stay with you during times of ease, and then during times of difficulty, I abandon you? No, by Allah, I will not abandon you. And it is narrated in the authentic Muqtad of Imam Hussein, that night when they were preparing for battle, Imam Hussein was sharpening arrows, June was sitting right there with him. Correct? That next day when the Ansar of Hussein all fought, we have narrations that say when June was martyred in battle, correct? His body lay there on the ground. Whenever people would come by, what would they see? His body smells like musk. This is the visa of Ashab al-Hussein. Every single one of us looks up to these people, regardless of what tribe they came from, regardless of their age, regardless of their gender, regardless of the color of their skin. Why? Because all of us want to be Ansar al-Hussein. Correct? All of us wish to be one of those people who stood between Abu Abdullah and that army of pagans. We say, you won't come near my Imam. Correct? But we say when it comes to Abu Abdullah Hussein, when all was said and done, when all of his Ansar were gone, who was left? It was just him. There was a moment on the 10th of Muharram when Abu Abdullah Hussein cried out, Ala min nasirin yansuruni. Is there no one left to defend us? And at that moment, June could not respond. He was already martyred. Correct? At that moment, Abu Fadl Abbas could not respond. He had already been martyred. Correct? The other companions of Abu Hussein, Zuhair, Burair, none of them could respond. Now it was time for Abu Abdullah himself to make that sacrifice. And that sacrifice belongs to every single one of us. That is Imam Hussein's gift to the mu'mineen. And that is Allah's gift to the mu'mineen. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, بحق الحسين الشهيد فرج عنا يا الله. اللهم بحق الحسين الشهيد فرج عن إخواننا وأخواتنا يا الله بحق محمد وآله الأطهار. شافي كل مريض، فك دين كل مديون. Ya Allah بحق محمد وآله الأطهار. Make all of our affairs easy for us, and please grant us the honor of the ziyarah of Abu Abdullah Hussein and his beloved companions. بحق محمد وآل محمد. We will end with Surah Al-Fatiha, تسبقها الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم